Hey everybody, welcome back to Avalon, episode 12. Today's episode, we're going to go away from, like I said last episode, the 3-block sort of expansion we've been doing in the past few episodes, and focus more on this area where we built this sort of mini interchange just off to the side of our main grid that gives access to a new diagonal road, which is sort of defining the new grid on the other side of this highway system here. So this area is very important because not only does it give access to, like I said, the new grid, but it's also still in the middle of the downtown sort of skyline area. So I sort of started by building up from the ground level and having lots of buildings underneath these highways and kind of creating a marketplace area underneath all of the roads. But beyond that, we need to actually have full-scale skyscrapers that maintain this skyline despite the fact that we have all these roads sort of blocking a lot of the areas. So this particular spot becomes very dense because we need to have, like I said, lots of buildings to make the skyline look natural and not have this weird gap in the skyline. It was kind of a tough decision to put this down here in the first place. I was worried that we wouldn't be able to maintain the skyline and that it might make the whole city look a little bit lopsided and strange because we got these gigantic buildings and then all of a sudden there's like this kind of gap area. So the mission with this episode is to begin this what is going to be really one of the biggest like commercial zones we've built so far. It's actually a lot bigger than the one we built in, I think, the 3rd or the 4th episode. And it's going to take 2 episodes to entirely finish this whole area off. So this one, we will actually get like a finished product to an extent. Like we're going to have all the buildings in place and a lot of the detailing done. But I'm going to come back in the next episode and focus more on really adding in all of the advertising and the billboards and making this thing feel like a total crazy like commercial central area with just like ads everywhere and detailing all along the roads. That'll all come in the next episode. But for this first episode, like I said, we're going to focus on a lot of the building design. So you might notice right off the bat that I'm using some new buildings. I'm actually using these, I believe they're like the Taiwan set. So they're not English billboards, and I kind of like this. I was talking about it a little bit, and I was sort of on the fence about mixing languages, but I feel like in this like super future city, it kind of makes sense to have like a total globalized, like there's just like all the different languages, we've gone into the future now, and there's, all kinds of people living in this town this city, this massive city. So there's advertising in various languages. I noticed this a lot in Blade Runner, especially the new Blade Runner. There's, like you've got English billboards, but you've also got lots of, I think in Blade Runner there's lots of like Japanese and I don't know, maybe Korean. I don't know if there was any Korean. I'm trying to think back to what I remember in that movie, but I know that there was like a very large variety of languages in the advertising. So I felt like that was a cool thing that I wanted to include in this build. So you're going to notice that I'm going to use these Taiwanese buildings in like the lower parts, kind of like building out the marketplace on the ground floor. And then we'll have these larger skyscrapers that are sort of defining the skyline. And in this case, we're starting to move towards a more residential area. So I think everything on the other side of this highway is going to be like high-rise residential, and we're going to really start building out the population from here. So I'm sort of preparing for that. I'm creating some commercial zones that are going to offset that in our RCI. And on top of that, I'm just playing around with different ideas for merging buildings together. You're noticing that I'm having a lot of trouble working with this particular corner. It's a very tight corner, and there's not a lot of room for buildings. And more importantly, I didn't want the buildings to feel like they weren't all cohesive and built together, because you'll look at these big cities and really none of them are in America. I'm thinking like maybe Hong Kong or even like Tokyo or even South Korea to an extent. Like there's lots of building on top of buildings and like really tightly packed buildings. So I'm trying to capture that a little bit in this particular part of our downtown area. And of course, I'm also, like I said, I'm adding in these kind of lower areas that make it so that the ground level has, interesting stuff going on. And we also have all the interesting stuff going on in the skyscrapers and the above ground areas. So I use those sort of Taiwanese buildings as like a baseline. And then I tried to use some larger office buildings to kind of like block out where the buildings are going to go. And then from there, it was just a matter of using some of these residential buildings and some of these skyscrapers to sort of detail and create some more dynamic shape to this whole corner here. And of course, I keep going back and deleting stuff. I think that I'm worried about the mix of buildings and how it's all going to look. And ooh, I should mention this like right now, because this probably won't come for another couple episodes, but because at the time of recording this episode, there actually wasn't this mod yet, but there's a mod called, I think it's called Painter, or yeah, I think it's called Painter. But what this mod does is it lets you click on buildings and then you can apply like a colorization to them. So you can colorize the entire building like any color, or you can take the existing colors in the building and like adjust the hue of it. So it's really, really useful for taking a whole lot of buildings that all don't look like they fit together and then making them fit together. And in a lot of these areas where it seems like there's a lot of clashing of colors and design style and stuff, I'm going to go back with this Painter mod and I will sort of adjust the colors so it all feels like it's one cohesive, block, and not just like a big modge podge of whatever, buildings and things. So we'll tweak that later on. But for now anyway, my focus was really just to build out this center area around this interchange, because I knew that this spot in particular is just like a very high traffic area, and it's not right now because we don't have the other side of the highway extending out to the rest of the city, and we also don't have any buildings on the other side of this turn off like diagonal road. But once we have all the residential over there and we have more buildings coming off the other side of the highway, we're getting a lot of traffic over here, and it just felt like the perfect opportunity to add lots of advertising, because we've got like, especially in this particular building right here, you're looking at this like kind of corner building. We've got a highway that literally drives straight looking directly at this building until it gets to this little kind of turnaround area, and then they obviously navigate and meander around the building. But certainly advertisers would not be missing out on this opportunity to put a bunch of billboards and advertising and stuff. So it really does feel like another kind of town or Times Square downtown area in a way. But this one feeling a little bit less I don't know if like less American is the word, but less like traditional, even in terms of like what you would typically see in a city, and a little more like dystopian, a little more on the side of like a Blade Runner or something. And I have been using some of these bigger billboards. I know that King Leno published, and he actually did this a while ago, but I didn't have access to them until I started recording this episode. But he released a whole lot of his gigantic billboards, which you'll see in a minute here. In fact, I already put one of them down there that I think that's one for one of the casinos in Las Vegas. I can't remember, but they're really, really big. I remember he like made a comment saying like, these are really big billboards, but I'll make them public because you'll probably want them. And I was like, oh, I'm sure they're not, I'm sure that his big is like nothing, like it'll be, it'll fit just fine in Avalon, but they are really, really big billboards. Like they fill entire buildings. So I had to get a little creative with how to fit those in, and some of them didn't really fit the way I wanted them to, but that wasn't a big deal. Either way, we got to use quite a few of them. And I think in the future, I'm going to either look for some more billboards or create my own billboards. I don't think it'd be absurdly difficult to make billboards in this game, so maybe I'll do that, like I mentioned a few episodes ago, having like a little asset creation episode where I just hop in Blender or 3ds Max or Maya or something, and then just make some billboards and maybe some Photoshop work to customize it a little bit. But you can see like the scale of these billboards is just insane. But I kind of love the look of them. They're very, very bright, and especially at night, they look really, really good. So I'm pretty happy with them, even though they are very, very bright. Moving on to this side, I don't think that I actually expand across this road at all. The other side of this little intersection that we made, this with the little pass-through right turn lanes, I don't think I actually crossed this intersection, but we did have a very big problem with pedestrians crossing in this intersection, and I don't think I'm going to tackle that in this episode. I do tackle it in the next episode, so you might notice in the cinematics that there are just like people constantly walking across this intersection, and they're not even crossing like at the crosswalks, they're crossing at the merge points for the right turn exits, and it just looks really odd. And then of course they're slowing down all the cars driving by. So I'm gonna create like a little, well, I'm gonna have a couple of these little elevators sitting on like all four corners, and then we're gonna have like underground passages to get underneath this this little interchange of this little intersection here, which is actually like pretty common. I've noticed that a lot in bigger cities when they have like really busy intersections, and especially around metros where they're already going to go underground anyway, they'll just have like an underground passage or an overground, you know, an overhead crossing or something like that. So I will use that later on to fix that just a little bit. But I also wanted to add some advertising on these other buildings we've already worked on. So this particular like residential high-rise, I kind of felt like it looked a little bit empty, and especially sitting here next to the road just felt a little bit weird. So we have some more advertising going in here, and I think details like this will continue to sort of come in as we continue to expand. I'm a little concerned about prop count in this area, and also just in general. And more importantly, the frame rate in this area is getting very, very, very low. So I'm kind of like, you know, polishing areas to the point where I'm satisfied with them, and then I'm coming back whenever I continue building on things and adding more as I go. But I'd rather err on the side of like just enough to feel satisfied with the number of props, and then I can always come back and add more, which is what I've already done with areas like this. So you can see I'm actually tweaking this Michael's here. I kind of felt like Michael's was a strange choice for a you know, like a store that's like right in the middle of this like crazy weird commercial downtown area. So I went back and I covered up the sign, and I kind of made it into this weird, like, you know, it's all over the place in terms of design. There's just like all these different buildings around it and all of this advertising. It feels a lot more like you know, a storefront that you would see in the middle of like a crazy downtown packed area full of ads and whatnot. So we do have that now instead of what we had before. I think I accidentally just moved that Michael's forward and didn't even realize it, but there we go. Fixed that. And then from here, this is one of my favorite parts actually. I think I had to go back and move a few different buildings here because I noticed that they were actually clipping into the highway. So I'm gonna move some residential buildings to kind of fit better over here. But this was one of my favorite parts of the whole build. I hope that I show a decent amount of it here. I think that I didn't cut too much of it out. I did cut out a lot of the billboard placement because it is kind of repetitive and sort of the same. But right underneath this Ford billboard here, once I finish plopping down these buildings and whatnot, I decided to do a little bit of like catwalk stuff and have like elevated walkway areas around the billboards. That's usually what you have in these areas so that the people can get up there and do maintenance on the billboards or change out whatever is up there or whatever. And I just kind of loved this, like these like big extended catwalk areas like way up, you know, on the sides of buildings with like this kind of industrial piping and stuff going on. I think that's kind of a cool look for this area. So I will have some of that here in a minute. I guess I underestimated how long it took me to fix this whole area and connect all of it together. Here we go. We're gonna throw down some big, you know, walkway areas and some kind of elevated supported structures up here. And I want to do this quite a bit in a lot of these areas. Again, it kind of comes down to prop count. It does take a lot of time and also a lot of props to add these in. So maybe I'll make some, oh, you know what? That's a really good idea. Actually, I think what I might do is just go into the building editor and then just create a few buildings that are like, you know, things kind of along these lines that are sort of modular. So just like some catwalked areas with like a bunch of pipes and a bunch of scaffolding and whatnot with some little fences along the edge. And then I could just use those as buildings and like raise them up and then plop them on the sides of buildings near advertising and whatnot. That might be a good idea. I don't know. We'll see about that. But I think from there, we're going to start working on these lower areas underneath. Actually, you know what? I'm not going to really detail this area underneath this interchange in this episode. I just wanted to start planning out where things were going to go. I think for now, I was mostly concerned about finishing things that I'd already started. I didn't really detail this back lot over here that was kind of behind this interchange. I think I built this actually last episode. It was like the very far end of that 3-block thing that I built. And I was so focused on that bridge that I just kind of was like, all right, well, I'll get to this later on. And I didn't really know how I was going to design this whole block corner area. So we're going to go back here and just finish this off real quick, and then add in lots of piping and all the detailing we want to add for this area. And then I think that this will actually just about finish off at least the above ground level on these two sides of our interchange. And then I'll probably come back in the next episode whenever I'm working on everything else and work on the ground level a bit more too. I'm adding some details now, but I'm going to do a lot more in the next episode, I believe. So anyway, I think we're getting pretty close to the end of the episode now, so I'm going to start wrapping this one up. But I hope you guys enjoyed this one. We will, like I said, come back and work on this area one more time next episode. And then from there, like I was kind of mentioning in the last few episodes, I want to start really expanding out and adding lots of residential buildings and kind of finding some ways to cut back on props while still having like detailed areas. And I know that when we start getting into these like big blocks full of residential high rises and whatnot, that's going to be a lot of the same stuff. So I'm sure there's an easy way to create some custom buildings that have details already, and then just kind of plop them down and fill areas quicker, because I want to really start expanding and making this city gigantic as soon as possible. So we'll see that as well, hopefully in the next few episodes as we get closer to moving away from the downtown area. I know I keep saying that, and it seems like there's always more things to do, and I don't like leaving things unfinished, so I usually just go back and keep working on them. But anyway, that's about it for this episode. So I hope you all enjoyed this one. Be sure to check back next Saturday for the next episode, or yeah, Saturday. That's correct. It's not Friday. See, I messed this up in FPS and I messed it up here. And anyway, check back next Saturday on this channel for episode 13. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.